I'm the definition of half man, half ass the clubs. Bad boy, that's what's up.
This is Dave Life, DLTV News. We have new updates in the Sean Diddy Combs investigation. Sean Diddy Combs has been accused of sexual assault twice in the last week. The latest accusation comes from a Manhattan federal court where Crystal McKinney filed a new sexual lawsuit last week stating she claims that she was drugged and sexually assaulted in Diddy's recording studio in 2003. She claims that she lost consciousness, woke up in a taxi cab, and she was 22 at the time of the attack. In another case, April Lampros, a former Fashion Institute of Technology student, said that Combs promised to mentor her in the industry after a meeting in 1994, but that the friendship quickly manifested into an aggressive, coercive, and abusive relationship based on sex. Diddy is also potentially facing a grand jury indictment. And here to tell us more about the potential grand jury indictment, along with the update on these two cases, is our legal contributor, Kara, rhymes with Sarah. Kara, come on to the stage and share with us your information. How are you, Kara?
I'm doing fantastic, Dave. Thanks for having me again. How are you?
I'm doing well. Can you explain to us in layman's terms, what is a grand jury indictment and what do these two new accusations mean for Diddy?
Sure. I understand there's a little confusion what happens with the grand jury process because it is a secret process. So if somebody is arrested or being investigated by the police, the evidence, any police reports, let's say it's a drug case, any information from the lab, all of that gets sent to the prosecutor's office. And it's typically an assistant district attorney, so someone that is working under the direct supervision of the elected official, the prosecutor for that particular county or whatever the jurisdiction is. So once they gather all the information from the investigators at the police precinct, there's also investigators that work directly for the district attorney's office. So they might do some additional investigation. They'll talk to witnesses. They might seek to gather additional information. If it's a drug case or let's say a sexual assault case, there'll be some DNA evidence that has to be examined. But after they look at all of that, they decide if they are going to indeed create an indictment. And that's a legal document that is accusing a person of a particular crime within that jurisdiction.
Okay, so is a grand jury indictment just simply an accusation?
It is an accusation. So they're being accused of violating some criminal part of the code in their area. So once they present the case to the grand jury, they might have compelled witnesses to testify. They will have a summary of the facts, dates, and enough information to allow the jury to decide whether or not the accused likely committed the crime as stated. And it's a very low burden. Typically, we say that you can indict a ham sandwich. Like, it's not hard at all. And while the grand jury is impaneled for however many weeks, they hear many cases every day. So it's not a huge, long, drawn-out hearing like you might think. It's usually just a summary of the facts and the evidence. So they don't actually often see all of the evidence or get an opportunity to touch it, but it's a summary of what's going on. Of course, the more complicated the case is, the longer the prosecutor will present. So let's say we're talking about something more complicated, a RICO Act. That might be the only case that particular grand jury hears for the day. Or let's say if it's a murder that involves a considerable more amount of evidence. But if we're talking about a battery case, something that's a little less complicated to understand, it takes less time to present the evidence to them. So if the jury does in fact find that this case should proceed to trial, they will issue what's called a true bill on the indictment. Sometimes the grand jury may decide to dismiss the case, and the prosecutor can decide to represent it if they need to do additional investigation, or let's say there were some errors in how the indictment was typed up, whatever the case may be, as long as it's within the statute of that particular crime.
Okay, I see. One more question just for me about grand juries. I'm looking here online, and it says a grand jury is a formal accusation that a grand jury determines whether there's enough evidence, like you just said. They said another way that a prosecutor can formally charge someone is with a criminal complaint directly with the court. Is that dependent upon jurisdiction, and are they somewhat different?
Yeah, it can depend on the jurisdiction. So, and I'm speaking in generalizations because there's so many states, and I only have personal experience practicing in the state of Georgia. But some jurisdictions will allow the prosecutor or their assistants, the assistant district attorneys, to file a misdemeanor charge without going through the grand jury process. So think about if you've ever had a moving violation. That, in fact, is in the criminal code. But there's no grand jury process to determine whether or not you should have your day in court, as they say. There's no need for that on the misdemeanor level in many, if not all, jurisdictions here in the US.
Okay, so something else I read online says that grand juries are usually made up of randomly selected residents who meet in secret for weeks to analyze the evidence and hear testimony. So the results of the grand jury indictment will be the decision to press criminal charges or not. Is that correct?
Yes, almost. So, grand juries, if memory serves correct, are between 16 and 23 people, and it's from the same pool that you would pull from to be a juror, right? For the period that the grand jury is impaneled, they try to have continuity in all of the cases for that time frame so that it's the same people examining cases for, I don't know if it's 2, 3, or 4 months, I can't remember exactly, so that defendants have a little bit more fairness, right? So the same group of jurors will be hearing all of the cases in that particular jurisdiction over a period of time. So it's not like they'll only hear 1 or 2 cases. So it helps create a little bit more impartiality across the board for all people accused of crimes.
Okay, I see. I noticed here in the news that they're reporting that CNN has reported that federal investigators have notified Combs's accusers that they could be brought to testify in New York City in a grand jury hearing. They're saying that the U.S. Justice Department is looking to indict the Bad Boy Records founder, and that the sources close to the investigation are saying it's ongoing. Potential witnesses have been prepped for testimony, and investigators are still gathering evidence. My question to you, Kara, does this surprise you that this has been going on, or is this kind of par for the course when dealing with the grand jury indictment?
It's not surprising, and I think it was maybe a week or so ago I had discussed that I was given it 90 days before an indictment was likely issued
Right.
after the release of the video. What is unusual, and it's because of the celebrity nature, is that it's so public. Typically, the grand jury proceedings are in secret, and the defendant is not given knowledge of it. The defendant is unaware that these people are being questioned, and they only become aware usually after they've been formally charged and a true bill has been issued in that particular case. So that's probably the only unusual part I would say for this particular case, is because he's such a huge celebrity.
I see. So, what about these 2 new cases? There's the case of April Lampros, a former Fashion Institute of Technology student, and then the case of Crystal McKinney, who's also filed and says that she was drugged and sexually assaulted. And I think the Lampros case had many incidences over time, possibly 4. How would these 2 new cases, and of course the Cassie case, could these potentially be called as witnesses, these accusers, in the grand jury hearing?
Absolutely. So you can be called as a witness either as a victim, meaning one of the counts, or at least one or more of the counts in the criminal complaint, were acts done against your person or your property. Or you could be called to show this is how this person behaves. That's their how they conduct themselves. So sometimes they'll use your habits to establish a pattern. So I'm not sure what their intent would be for calling any of these witnesses, but it could be either or, whether they're a victim or to show this is how he grooms people. This is how he has a tendency for violence. So there's a number of ways that the prosecution can use the witnesses, both at the grand jury level and then throughout the course of the criminal proceeding, if they get to that point.
I do remember you said that charges could be brought up. You gave it 90 days.
That was total speculation, but just in my experience, because it is such a public matter and we are in an election year coming up, unfortunately, politics and elections do play a role. I see people wanting to try and move forward sooner rather than later.
Okay, Kara, I have a question about the Manhattan office that's bringing these charges. I know they've been very busy with the R. Kelly case, with the Trump case, as Trump was recently found guilty on 34 counts of business fraud, which are felonies in the state of New York. And now we have a potential grand jury hearing on the Diddy case. Does that tax an office, to have so many cases going on? Do you feel that maybe the Trump case had to get out of the way first before they could focus on Diddy? What's your thoughts on just how busy, that office is with bringing cases?
So I can only imagine that they're stretched relatively thin, or thinner than they probably were in years past with so many high profile cases, along with the everyday caseload. And it's not just the assistant district attorneys, right? It's their paralegals, if they have any, their investigators. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. And unfortunately, usually attorneys who are working for the government don't have the same number of resources as those working in private practice. That's just the nature of the beast. So you end up doing a lot of things yourself. There's no one, necessarily just organizing your paperwork. There's no one who's, running to get your coffee necessarily. So I can imagine that they have their hands relatively full. And part of running a successful office, in my humble opinion, is the timing and how you use your resources to your best ability. So that would include saying, okay, we can't handle, 4 huge gang cases at one time. And I don't know how their office is separated, but they usually have different divisions. So there might be sex crimes. There probably is one dealing with police officers and political figures. And I can't remember what it's called in New York, but each different unit might have a different caseload, but then you also have your star prosecutors. There's no hiding that. And they can probably cover a variety of different types of cases. And so there might be some shuffling going on around in that particular office, but I can't speak from direct knowledge, just speculation.
Kara, I want to change gears back to his 2 latest accusers, one of them being a young lady named Crystal McKinney. Crystal McKinney was a 22-year-old model at the time of the alleged assault. She met Combs at Men's Fashion Week, an event in downtown Manhattan, and he had told her she was going to make it big. And they go on to detail a relationship of smoking and drinking and pressure and alcohol, and Diddy making promises that he would help her career. What do you know about this case with the accuser, Crystal McKinney, the former aspiring model?
Yeah. According to the Washington Post, McKinney was actually the winner of MTV's 1998 Model Mission Competition. And I believe that was how they crossed paths initially. It's been reported widely that she's accusing him of having made promises to help advance her modeling career and break out in other areas of entertainment. Unfortunately, she is one of many women who are accusing him of grooming, sexual misconduct, and sexual assault in a variety of ways. My understanding is she's also accusing him of it taking place over a large span of time.
Correct.
What is interesting, I think, about this is it's been reported that she has kept the outfit on one of the particular incidents and kept it in her closet. So that can be very damning.
Yeah, that's similar to the Monica Lewinsky case, when Monica kept the dress that she was in when Bill Clinton and her had a moment.
Right, but the difference between Monica Lewinsky is Bill Clinton wasn't just in trouble or having political issues because of the
Right.
sexual act. It was because of the lying about it. in
Correct.
this case in this case Diddy can claim that it was consensual, so just
Right.
proof of sexual activity alone would not be sufficient to rise to a criminal act, because she was an adult. She was at, the age of consent at the time. She was
Hmm.
22. But proving that there was a sexual act that was not consensual, it would be key
So,
in her case.
so in her case, and I'm looking at some of the details right now. It says that after the event at Men's Fashion Week, he invited her back to his studio, and he invited her back to his studio where his associates offered her a joint of marijuana, and she said she does smoke weed. And he said, "You've never had weed like this." She takes a puff or two of the weed, it says that the plaintiff, meaning Crystal McKinney, later came to find out that Combs had laced the joint with a narcotic or some other intoxicating substance. It says that he then pressured her to drink more alcohol, and after she was intoxicated, he pulled her into a bathroom and made her perform a sex act on her. So that's her claim. He said it was non-consensual, and she was plied with drugs and alcohol.
And unfortunately, that's one of the challenges when you bring accusations like this so many years after. And I'm not excusing anyone's actions, but the further away from the incident, sometimes it's the harder to prove. Like what was she what were the drugs laced with? How can we now tell? And that's some of the challenges with people who wait, even though they're justified and they have real issues with coming forward, especially when the person they're accusing has any power or fame. It's just another hurdle to try and overcome, to go back through and get enough evidence to be able to present to a jury.
Okay, that makes sense. It goes on to say that she woke up in a cab and realized that she had been assaulted. And in the lawsuit, it says that after the assault, that Diddy seemed to blackball her from the industry, and that she had a hard time gaining work. I know that she became severely depressed. She began to blame herself. And the suit says that she's seeking unspecified damages for pain and suffering, as well as punitive damages. Is that typical in a case like this? The types of damages she's seeking?
It is typical to request it, but it is a little bit more challenging to show loss of income or loss of opportunity when you don't already have a proven track record. So if I had been working in an industry for 10 years and, whether my income was steady or it was growing by, let's say, 10% every year, and you said something that caused me to lose opportunities, and now I'm making less than half of what I was making previously, that's easier to prove. But my understanding is this was at the very beginning of her career. And although she won a competition, we all know now that doesn't always guarantee or translate into, financial gain. So how do you show that?
Yeah, good point here. Okay, it says that she's seeking damages from Bad Boy Records, Bad Boy Entertainment, John Clothing, and Universal Music Group. So that is the newest case with Crystal McKinney, and there was one other case with April Lampros. So reading here in New York, they're reporting that she was a college student in 1994. It says that he's plied her with possible ecstasy, and that she's had relations with him and his late ex-girlfriend, Kim Porter. It says in another meeting, he raped her in a Manhattan hotel room in 1995. She passed out, woke up the next morning, sore, confused, and nude. How will this case, along with the Crystal McKinney case, just add to the possible? It's just adding to everything that's going on. What's your reaction to what's going on with Diddy and all of the lawsuits?
The video was very damning for him. In light of him vehemently denying it in, the past few months, trying to say that he didn't do anything wrong, he will be cleared of all wrongdoing. And then we actually see a video that directly corroborates with what was partially said in Ms. Ventura's lawsuit. So he's going to have a huge uphill battle. I will say one thing that might work in his favor, unfortunately, is that Kim Porter has passed away. And so there isn't a person, at least as far as we know now, to be able to corroborate that. Now, the difference might be is if Miss Porter had confided in someone else after the events, or if she recorded it somewhere. I know there have been reports that she was working on a book. I don't know her personally, but it didn't seem like she was one to share many intimate details, the ugly parts of her relationship with Mr. Combs throughout the years. So, what did that book entail? I'm not sure. I would be interested to also hear Albie Shore's take on things, because he and Kim Porter do share a child, even though the child, I believe,
Hmm.
has Diddy's last name.
Well, it's Quincy, and I'm not sure if Quincy's last name is Brown or Combs. I'd have to look
Well,
that one up.
he definitely calls Diddy dad and refers
Of
to him
course.
as a dad.
Yeah.
Um, no slight to his biological father, but that's just how it's been presented in the media. So I'd be interested to hear what his take is on things. I'm sure there probably were some times that Kim probably confided in him or shared some information as they kind of grew to become just friends over the years after they broke up.
Kara, I have a question about the late Kim Porter. Rest in peace to Kim, and Cassie. Kim's no longer with us, so she can't corroborate anyone's testimony, but Cassie can. So my question to you is, I've heard that Cassie might be considered part and parcel to some of the crimes, that may have occurred. People being brought across state lines for sex trafficking, things like that. Illicit drug use, things like that. But I've also heard that if Cassie's going to cooperate with police, then she may have a deal where there's some sort of immunity. Can you speak to the idea that some of the people that are around Diddy might be guilty of crimes like his drug mule? The person, I believe his name is Brandon, I think, like the drug mule, they might be guilty of some crimes, but if they're cooperating with police, they might get some sort of immunity or some sort of deal.
Yeah. I don't believe that she would even need immunity. I don't believe that they would be charging her with anything based on our understanding, what's been reported in the news, of what she's had to endure over a period of time. So, sex crimes have come a long way, and I'm grateful for that. But let's say somebody was sex trafficked, for example. Um, they wouldn't likely charge them with prostitution, right? So they were probably actually receiving money for services rendered, but our thinking on the charges have evolved. So I don't see that she would even really need immunity. The prosecutor has discretion to charge or not to charge. Now, I would believe that her attorney would probably say, for her to be able to discuss this, we need some assurances on paper that she won't be charged with anything related to acts taking place from whatever date to whatever date. But I don't see a world where she would be charged, because it's clear that she's a victim.
Okay, so I have a question about Epstein's girlfriend, helper, supporter, Ghislaine Noel Marion Maxwell. She's the British former socialite, convicted a sex offender, and in 2021 she was found guilty of child sex trafficking and other offenses in connection with the deceased financier and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. So for those of us who are, again, not attorneys, how is Ghislaine's case different than Cassie? Ghislaine was seen as a trafficker and an offender and was found guilty. She was his helper, but Cassie wouldn't. It would be different in her case. Is that correct?
I unfortunately was not really privy to many of the facts in her case, but the difference would be the level of autonomy and her willingness to participate. So there's no indication that she was coerced or forced to do these things for Epstein.
Mm.
Right? There's no indication, to my knowledge, that she was physically assaulted, beaten, in furtherance of subverting some sort of control over her, like Cassie was. So those are two separate things. So you can do the same act, but if you were under someone's direct control, you shouldn't be held responsible.
That's like when someone signs a contract under duress.
Correct.
It may be null and void because they wouldn't have signed it if they weren't being forced.
Exactly. So you hold a gun to someone's head, they're going to behave differently than if you just ask nicely.
Correct. I don't think Eazy-E would have signed everything in the Fro case if it wasn't, all the stuff that supposedly happened with Suge and those guys.
Yeah,
Okay, that
it's
makes
a little
sense.
different. Like if I ask you, say you need to do this or else, I don't think you're gonna take it too serious. Suge Knight in his prime, that's a different conversation.
Definitely, most definitely. Okay, Kara, so I have one last question. With Donald Trump being found guilty of 34 felonious charges just a couple days ago, his sentencing is coming up on July 11th. The Republican National Convention is July 15th through 18th. Do you think a possible grand jury indictment and hearing for Diddy will come before or after Trump is sentenced?
So there's a lot of moving parts. And this is totally speculation because I'm not sure how their grand jury calendar works. There are times that grand juries are actually off for the holidays, or they're just not having the grand jury impaneled on that particular day. But I would likely say it would take place after Trump's sentencing. I would say between then and Labor Day is where I would see something falling, maybe mid-July.
Okay. Is Diddy still in the United States? I believe he is. I believe that, and just based on what I've been reading in the news, I believe that the government has let him know, hey, you probably have something coming up and you cannot flee. You can't leave. So some people are saying, oh, he's in Bali. He's with, Russell Simmons. I think he's in the States. I just don't think he's traveling. And the reason I bring that up, just to close this out, he did not attend his two daughters, his twins' prom, the girls, and he did not attend his other daughter, Chance, her high school graduation on May 30th, just a few days ago. And when paparazzi caught up to his son, Justin, Justin basically said he's good. And when they asked him, hey, do you know if that apology took a lot? How's your father doing? He didn't reiterate anything. He just got in the car and drove off. He just basically let them know he's good. Do you think that Diddy is in the States? Or do you think Diddy has truly left the States and is somewhere in some non-extradition country? Why would he not go to his daughter's major events when he's been in their lives like a loving father should, for so many years?
So because of all that's going on with his civil and possible criminal trouble, I can see where he wouldn't want to detract from their experience in their graduation, their prom, whatever. So I can understand if he chose not to attend, to give them that time. Because if he were to attend, it would be a madhouse. Paparazzi, parents, children, animals. I mean, it would just be chaos. But do I think he is still in the country? I don't know. He could have possibly left. He has not been charged. There has not been a grand jury indictment. They have not received a true bill, so he's free to move about. They can request that he not leave.
But if he leaves, he can't come back. Essentially, if he leaves, that's almost an admission of guilt. I would think, to the normal layman, on the street, I would think that sounds like Diddy's admitting guilt if he flees. Wouldn't you agree with that or no?
I wouldn't agree that it's just admitting guilt. That's what it would look like. But sometimes people accept plea deals because of the evidence, the stress of a potential trial. If there's a offer on the table that they're willing to accept, let's say it doesn't include any time in confinement, they might say, hey, I don't want to roll the dice. I don't want to spend whatever amount in legal fees and put my family through the stress of it all. So there are many factors at play. Unfortunately for Mr. Combs, he is a public figure. He's a very well-known face. I can't imagine him being able to go anywhere and not be identifiable.
Yeah, can't stop, won't stop. I mean,
well, we'll see.
That's Diddy. He had videos like, you don't know me, it's me, it's P. Diddy.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's definitely well known. Let me ask you a question about settling and not admitting guilt. Michael Jackson settled his first case because his lawyers, Mark Garagos at the time, recommended, Mr. Jackson, if you don't want to go through all the legal strain that you just mentioned, Kara, and all of the public embarrassment and all of those things, you may want to settle. So Michael settled. And then later, somewhat 10 years later or something, when the next accuser came out, he didn't settle. He took it to court. He won. Tory Lanez, they gave him a potential plea deal for the Megan Thee Stallion case. Tory didn't take it. Took it to trial, lost, and got 10 years. Should Diddy take a plea deal if it's allowed, or do you think he'll, like I said, leave to a country that won't extradite him and just be on the lam, or do you think Diddy will take it to trial?
I can see a world where Diddy would take it to trial, and you can't accept an offer that has not been made. There's no requirement that they provide an offer. And if they do decide to give you an offer, it could be life imprisonment. The offer does not have to be reasonable at all.
Mm-hmm.
As a prosecutor, you can determine what sort of offer you want to provide depending on the strength of your case, the evidence that you have, who the defendant is, and quite frankly, sometimes who their lawyer is.
Mm-hmm.
So, when I was a prosecutor, if it was a lawyer I knew I could steamroll, I'm going to give you an offer because I know what's likely going to happen. Now, there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee in any trial, right? But there's no requirement that an offer be made.
Yeah, and I've heard when the evidence is overwhelming and you're a defense attorney, sometimes you're just really trying to get a deal on the table.
Yes.
Because if it's overwhelming, everybody knows your client did this, and it's hard to not prove it.
Just because the evidence is overwhelming does not mean that the defense doesn't have an opportunity to be successful.
Now, are we talking about in civil or criminal cases? And here's why I'm asking. We just saw the Diddy video where he's assaulting Cassie.
Mm-hmm.
He came out and pretty much said it's me. Would that go to trial? And if that did go to trial, would it be a civil case or would it be a criminal case? Just with everything that's going on, if any charges are brought, we're now talking criminal, right? Because the Cassie thing, he settled the civil case out of court, so I don't think they can try him for that assault in a civil case because I believe he's already settled it. Could they try him for that assault in a criminal case?
They absolutely can try him depending on the statute of limitations for each underlying charge. So criminally, each charge will have a time frame, like a limit to when you can actually pursue criminal charges. So some charges, they don't want you coming back 20 years later. Let's say it's a DUI. They don't want the government to come back and say, I'm charging with a DUI now, 20 years after the fact. That's unfair for the defendant to then try and be able to mount a defense. But then there are other more serious crimes that do not have a statute of limitations. Murder is one of them. Sex trafficking is usually, kidnapping is one of them. Rape is usually one of them. There's a few that most jurisdictions will agree that they want the government to be able to pursue charges no matter the time frame.
Okay. That makes sense. All right. So Diddy could be tried depending on the statute of limitations in a criminal case based on just the video that we saw, not to mention all the other things.
Absolutely. Okay. Depending on what they decide to pursue against him, right? And there are different statute of limitations that if we're talking about in state court versus federal court.
So, Kara, just to close this out, you believe that Diddy will possibly receive a grand jury indictment. You said after the Trump trial or before?
It's a speculation. I see a world where it'll be after.
After the Trump sentencing.
Yes.
Okay.
That's just 5 weeks away. And I imagine there's still some additional witnesses that they need to interview. They want to, dot their I's and cross their T's, and there'll likely be a dates reserved to make a presentation to the grand jury on this particular case. So especially if we're talking about witnesses coming from out of state, they usually like to present the entirety of one case all at one time, whether it's 1 day, 2 days, all together, so that the grand jury can make a decision without splitting witnesses up. When witnesses are coming from out of state, they want to give them an opportunity to make arrangements to be able to travel in for the hearing, their accommodations. I'm not sure if that stuff is covered by the government or not, but they want to give them enough time to be able to know these are the dates you'll be here. and this will give them an opportunity to plan accordingly.
Okay. All right. And the result of the grand jury indictment could be a criminal trial, right?
Correct.
All right.
Well,
we
at
will
the very least, he will be formally charged.
criminal charges, formally charged.
Yes.
Got
Because
it. Okay.
after the charges, then there's discovery and pretrial motions and a few other things. You know, they probably try and get some evidence thrown out. And along the way, they might come to a plea agreement.
Mm. And this is a lengthy process, I'm assuming, similar to the R. Kelly trial. It was lengthy before everything got started. Okay.
Very lengthy. You know, because even after, let's say, the grand jury does issue a true bill and they move forward in the process, it's not like trial is next month.
Got it. Okay. Well, Kara, we appreciate you joining and giving us your legal analysis of the situation. Please come back and keep us informed as there are more developments in both the Diddy story and the Trump story. We appreciate your time. Thanks, Kara.
All right. Thanks for having me, as always.
Absolutely. Hey guys, this is Dave, Life of DLTV News. Thank you for watching. Make sure you follow and subscribe for all the latest updates on the Sean Diddy Combs case, the Trump case, and any breaking news. This is Dave Life. We appreciate you. Thanks.